What happens when engineers push a bulldozer beyond every rational limit, and the machine pushes back? These aren't underpowered machines that couldn't do the job. These are monsters that tore themselves apart under their own force, ripped through final drives like paper, shook the ground so hard they sank into it, and turned maintenance crews into full-time trauma teams. Some were discontinued, some were detuned just to survive. One never worked a single day. These are 10 dozers that were simply too strong for their own good. Number 10. The Allis-Chalmers HD41. In 1963, at the Chicago Road Show, Allis-Chalmers gave the heavy equipment world a preview of something unprecedented: the HD41 crawler tractor. At 70 tons and 524 horsepower, powered by a Cummins VTA 1710C turbocharged V12 diesel, it was the largest, most powerful crawler tractor ever shown to the public. The crowd was stunned, the competition was terrified, but Allis-Chalmers made a deliberate and critical decision. They wouldn't rush it to market. They wanted to be absolutely certain the machine would perform reliably before a paying customer ever laid eyes on a production unit. So the HD41 went into a lengthy development program with multiple prototypes tested in a wide variety of conditions. It took 7 more years. The HD41 didn't enter full production until What those 7 years of testing revealed was a fundamental problem that would define the machine's entire working life. The HD41 was too powerful for its own running gear. In heavy applications, hard ripping, dozing rock, working in particularly aggressive terrain, the machine tore up final drives and tracks with a ferocity that shocked operators and service crews. The raw torque generated by the 524 horsepower Cummins V12, transmitted through a 3-speed power-shift transmission, placed loads on the drivetrain components that the engineering of the era simply couldn't fully contain. Operators quickly discovered that while the HD41 could outwork a Caterpillar D9H, then Cat's largest machine at 385 horsepower, it did so at a ruinous cost. Service intervals were brutal. Parts consumption was enormous. Word spread among contractors in Australia and other markets who had purchased the machines that the only way to make a HD41 commercially viable was to literally detune the engine, reducing power output by 80 to 100 horsepower just to keep the drivetrain intact long enough to be economical. The Allis-Chalmers branded HD41 was produced from 1970 to 1974, when Fiat purchased a controlling share of Allis-Chalmers and the construction division became Fiat Allis. The machine was renamed the 41B. The Fiat Allis 41B received some engineering improvements, but not enough to solve the fundamental problem. The last 41B came off the production line in Total production of the entire HD41 41B family across both periods amounted to approximately 3,000 machines, a figure that dramatically underperforms what Allis-Chalmers had hoped for when they first showed the concept in 1963. The machine's legacy is that of an engineering achievement that the metallurgy and manufacturing tolerances of its era couldn't fully support. Number 9. The Komatsu D455A. For 2 years from its commercial launch in 1974 to Caterpillar's introduction of the D10 in 1977, the Komatsu D455A held the title of the world's most powerful production bulldozer. Powered by a Cummins VTA 1710C turbocharged V12 engine producing 620 flywheel horsepower, it weighed 167,000 pounds and could carry a 16-foot straight blade or a massive 20-foot U-blade capable of moving staggering amounts of overburden. Getting the D455A to that point had taken Komatsu over 5 years of development. One of the first major challenges was the engine. In the mid-1960s, Komatsu did not manufacture any power plant with sufficient horsepower to move a machine at this scale, so they turned to their cooperative partnership with Cummins Engine Company, which had been in place since 1961, to source the VTA 1710 V12. The second major challenge was the transmission. No conventional single-path transmission could handle the torque. Komatsu's engineers devised a dual-path system with 2 torque converters and 2 4-speed power-shift transmissions, linked by a center clutch, spreading the load between 2 independent powertrain lines. The D455A worked. It was a genuine giant and a genuine performer in surface mining and large quarry applications. But it had a fundamental weakness that the Caterpillar D10's revolutionary elevated sprocket undercarriage was specifically engineered to address the conventional low-drive undercarriage on the D455A, suffered under extreme ripping and dozing loads in hard rock. The drive sprocket sat at ground level, constantly exposed to the shock loading, debris impact, and abrasive wear of the most aggressive applications. In hard ripping, exactly the scenario that super dozers are built for, the undercarriage components wore at rates that made ownership expensive. When Caterpillar introduced the D10 in 1977 with its elevated sprocket design, which reduced shock loads on the final drives by 50% and extended undercarriage service life dramatically, the D455A's competitive position was severely weakened. Komatsu updated the machine to the D455A1 in the early 1980s, raising engine output to 650 horsepower, but it was not enough. In 1984, Komatsu announced the entirely new D475A, designed from the ground up with a modular architecture and superior durability. The D455A1 remained in production until 1987, before the D475A2 fully replaced it. The D455A's story is one of a magnificent machine made obsolete by the very problem it couldn't solve. It was too powerful for its own undercarriage. Number 8. The Caterpillar D9H. The concept was brilliant in the way that only a man named Buster could dream up. R.A. Buster Peterson of Peterson Tractor Company, a Caterpillar dealer in California, had been customizing and innovating Caterpillar equipment for decades. In the early 1960s, he came up with an idea. Instead of building one enormous bulldozer, why not couple two standard D9Hs together, end-to-end, connected by a ball joint with a down-pressure hydraulic cylinder? One operator in the front tractor, using air controls, could operate both machines simultaneously. The result was the Quad D9, also called the DD9G. Two D9G bulldozers, each producing 385 horsepower, coupled in tandem for a combined output of 770 horsepower. It was the most powerful push-loading configuration ever built. It could push the largest wheel tractor scrapers in existence. Machines like the 54 cubic yard Caterpillar 666 scrapers that were revolutionizing earth-moving productivity. When Caterpillar bought Peterson's patent rights in 1968 and put the DD9G into production, it became Caterpillar's answer to the HD41 without the HD41's metallurgical crisis. But the DD9G had its own devastating problem: maintenance. Experienced mechanics who have worked on DD9Gs report that maintenance compared to a conventional high-drive dozer is more than doubled. You essentially have two complete, fully independent powertrains to service, two engines, two transmissions, two complete undercarriages, plus the connection hardware between them, including the ball joint, the down-pressure hydraulic system, and the air control linkages that ran between the front and rear machines. When anything failed on the rear unit, which it frequently did, given the additional stresses of being pushed by the front machine's drawbar pull, accessing it for repair required working in the tight, cramped space between the two coupled tractors. Transport was a separate nightmare entirely. Moving a single D9G already required careful planning and oversized load permits. Moving a DD9G, two coupled D9Gs required breaking the connection, transporting each unit separately, and reassembling them at the new job site. The side-by-side version introduced in 1969, the SXS D9H, was even more extreme, pushing a 24-foot blade with two D9Gs linked by ball and socket joints, a configuration so wide it created its own set of transport challenges. Caterpillar discontinued the DD9H when the D10 arrived in The D10's single 700 horsepower V12 engine in a single coherent machine was simply a better answer than two engines in two coupled frames. But the DD9H's period of operation, roughly 1968 to the late 1970s, it was simply a solution so complex that it couldn't justify its own existence once a cleaner alternative appeared. Number 7. The Dresser TD40. The Dresser TD40 has one of the most complicated corporate histories in bulldozer history. Its origins lie with International Harvester, which had been building the well-respected TD series crawler tractors for decades. The TD40 concept was in development since the late 1970s as International Harvester's answer to the Allis-Chalmers HD41 and the growing superdozer market. It weighed over 67 tons when fully outfitted and was powered by a Cummins diesel engine producing 460 horsepower. Then International Harvester ran into severe financial problems in the early 90s. The company, struggling with crippling debt from a combination of market downturns and labor disputes, sold its construction equipment division to Dresser Industries in 1990. Dresser inherited the TD40 program, bringing it to market under their own name. The TD40 was a capable machine. It was further developed into the TD40B and later the TD40C in 1997, which eventually reached 520 flywheel horsepower from a Cummins QSK 19 six-cylinder turbocharged diesel. On paper, the TD40 was a competitive offering in the large dozer market, but in practice, the TD40 and its successors earned a reputation that operators summarized bluntly: they were money pits. The inboard planetary final drives on the E and G variants were notoriously difficult to service if problems developed, requiring extensive disassembly to access. The transmissions and engines in these large configurations generally required rebuild at 6,000 hours, shorter intervals than operators expected given the machine's size and purchase price. Parts were expensive, and the service work required to maintain and fix these machines at the highest power levels was substantial. Veterans of the TD25 and TD40 series from this era regularly warned that while the initial purchase price on used machines was attractive, the operating costs could be crushing. The TD40 line eventually transitioned to Dresser, a company resulting from Dresser's partnership with Polish manufacturer Huta Stalowa Wola, and the line continued in production for decades. But the machines from the early Dresser period never shook their reputation for being punishingly expensive to operate at their rated power levels, a machine whose strength continually outpaced what its owners could afford to maintain. Number 6. The Caterpillar SXS D9H. If the DD9G was a machine that was too complex to maintain, the side-by-side D9H configuration taken to its absolute extreme was a machine that was too powerful for anyone but the most extreme operators to justify. The SXS concept, two Cat D9G or D9H tractors linked side by side, pushing a shared 24-foot blade, was introduced by Caterpillar in 1969. For strip mining operations doing large-scale land reclamation, where the goal was to move maximum cubic yards of overburden as rapidly as possible, the SXS was a genuine productivity tool. Two D9H units side by side delivered 820 combined horsepower with a blade capacity that dramatically exceeded anything a single machine could achieve. In 1976, a Texas contractor named Russell & Sons Construction took the SXS concept and pushed it entirely beyond reason. They modified one of their SXS D9H sets so that the right-hand tractor was offset 11 feet behind the left-hand machine and equipped the configuration with a monstrous 48-foot, 8-inch-long variably curved angle dozer blade fabricated by Balderson specifically for this machine. The blade alone weighed 27,600 pounds. This configuration was named Double Dude. In 1977, Double Dude set a record that stands in the annals of earth-moving history. In 1 hour of operation, it moved 14,210 cubic yards of overburden. That figure is almost incomprehensible. More than 14,000 cubic yards in a single hour, sustained. To put it in context, an average D9 class bulldozer moves roughly 500 to 800 cubic yards per hour in production dozing. Double Dude moved nearly 20 times that. But Double Dude could not be maintained economically, could not be transported between job sites without enormous logistical investment, and could only work in very specific open strip mining applications where the geometry of the cut allowed such an extreme blade configuration to function. It has since been retired. The blade itself was preserved as what Russell & Sons describes as a unique billboard. The machine was simply too strong, too large, and too specialized to be anything other than a staggering one-time achievement. Number 5. The Allis-Chalmers HD41. At the tractor pull, here is one of the most remarkable stories in the history of heavy equipment, and it is completely true. At a tractor pull event, the kind of competition where agricultural and industrial machines are tested against weighted sleds on a measured course, an Allis-Chalmers HD-41 was entered into competition. The machine weighed 101,500 pounds and was powered by a 524 horsepower Cummins turbocharged V12 with 1,710 cubic inches of displacement. It approached the weighted drag sled with the quiet confidence of a machine that had never met anything it couldn't move. It didn't just pull the sled. It didn't just win the competition. Officials had to actually flag the HD-41 to a stop, physically wave it down, because it was about to pull the drag apart and tow it off the fairgrounds entirely. At no point during the entire pull did the machine show any signs of slowing. The officials intervened not because the HD-41 was struggling, but because it was going to destroy the equipment. This story is not legend. It is documented in Farm Collector magazine's coverage of Allis-Chalmers crawlers and corroborated by multiple historical accounts of the HD-41's power characteristics. The machine that would later destroy its own final drives in hard ripping operations couldn't be stopped at a tractor pull. That is the central paradox of the HD-41. It had power that exceeded anything the era could contain, including itself. Number 4. The Komatsu D575A. The Komatsu D575A is the largest production bulldozer in history. A 12-cylinder, turbocharged and intercooled Komatsu SA12V170E diesel engine delivering 1,150 horsepower. A blade measuring 24 feet, 3 inches wide, and nearly 12 feet tall. Standard blade capacity of 90 cubic yards per pass, nearly the equivalent of 10 dump truck loads in a single push. Operating weight of 336,420 pounds. These are specifications that make every other bulldozer on Earth look like a toy. And Komatsu built it, knowing it would lose money on every single machine. When Komatsu began developing the D575A from the D555A prototype, first shown publicly at ConExpo in Houston in 1981, they were entering territory where the laws of economics were as challenging as the laws of physics. The manufacturing costs of building a machine at this scale were not simply twice those of the D455A, which would have been the logical price relationship, they were dramatically higher. The custom components, the specialized assembly processes, the one-off engineering solutions required at £336,000, these costs could not be recovered at any market price customers would actually pay. Komatsu made a deliberate business decision to absorb the losses on the D575A. Because the reputational value of owning the world's largest production bulldozer title drove sales across their entire product line. The D575A was not a profit center. It was a marketing statement written in 1,550 horsepower. But the early machines suffered from something far more alarming than lost profits: catastrophic failures. Early D575A2 units experienced some burnouts due to powertrain and engine issues, failures so severe they defined the first generation of the machine as fundamentally unready for the brutal conditions of Appalachian coal mining. Komatsu's engineers went back to work. The D575A3, introduced in 2001, featured a redesigned powertrain electronic control system, reinforced undercarriage roller guards, simplified hydraulic plumbing, longer life hoses, seals, wiring harnesses and connectors. The A3 was genuinely better, but the total production run, 41 A2 machines and 12 A3 machines, for a grand total of just 53 units across the machine's entire production lifetime, tells the real story. Production ended in 2000. The D575A was the ultimate expression of the superdozer concept, and it was ultimately limited by the fact that almost no job site in the world was large enough, smooth enough, and remote enough from road weight restrictions and transport logistics to justify owning one. Number 3. The Caterpillar D10. When Caterpillar revealed the D10 at a dealer meeting in fall 1977, reactions split almost immediately into two camps. The mining contractors and large earth movers who had been waiting for something more powerful than the D9H were electrified. 700 horsepower, 180,000 pounds, a 35 cubic yard U-blade, and the first elevated drive sprocket undercarriage in the modern era. They wanted it immediately, but the engineers and mechanics who looked at the machine carefully had a different reaction. It didn't look like any traditional cat dozer, recalled George Alexander, one of the 4 Caterpillar engineers named on the patent for the elevated sprocket design. The entire dozer was different in almost every way, except for the engine. The transmission was mounted behind the engine, the exact opposite of every Caterpillar bulldozer that had come before. The triangular track configuration created by the elevated sprocket looked unlike any other machine. The modular component design was a complete break from established practice. The old drive undercarriage system that the D10 replaced had a well-documented problem. The drive axle was under constant strain from both the vehicle's load and the terrain beneath it. Under extreme conditions, 700 horsepower hard ripping in a surface coal mine, this combined stress was prone to frequent failure. Caterpillar had generated 93 patents developing the D10 solution. The elevated sprocket moved the drive sprocket off the ground entirely, separating the suspension from the drivetrain and reducing stress on both. But those 93 patents and the 7 years of prototype testing that preceded the production launch tell the real story of how difficult this machine was to get right. The initial field tests revealed enough issues that Caterpillar dispatched the 10P series prototypes to different job sites, specifically to accumulate failure data. What they found drove further redesign. By the time the production D10 reached customers in 1978, it was ready. But the development cost in patents, in engineering hours, in prototype failures was extraordinary. Nearly 1,000 D10s were built between 1978. For a machine in this weight class, that's a respectable number. But it also reveals how narrow the market was for a bulldozer so powerful and so physically large that moving it between job sites required logistical planning that smaller contractors simply couldn't manage. The D10 was ultimately a success that proved its own concept. But it arrived in the world as a machine so radically different from what had come before that even Caterpillar's own dealer network was skeptical. Getting 700 horsepower to the ground in 1977 required an entirely new theory of what a bulldozer should be. Number 2. The Caterpillar D9H. The Caterpillar D9H was introduced in 1974 to replace the D9G, and it carries a distinction that Caterpillar has never taken away from it. At 410 horsepower, the D9H is still recognized as the most powerful conventional track-type tractor in Caterpillar's history. No Cat bulldozer using the traditional flat-track undercarriage design has ever exceeded it. That figure, most powerful conventional, tells you exactly why the D9H matters and exactly why it represents the outer boundary of what the conventional dozer design could sustain. By 410 horsepower, the conventional undercarriage, with its ground-level drive sprocket, its exposure to rock, mud, and abrasive debris, was operating at the absolute limit of what the engineering could support reliably. The previous D9G had already strained the system at 385 horsepower. The D9H pushed 410 through the same fundamental architecture, and in the most demanding applications, hard ripping in granite quarries, working in highly abrasive sand and gravel operations, undercarriage wear rates were severe. Mechanics who worked on D9Hs in mining environments became intimately familiar with the cycle of undercarriage replacement. Final drives, track links, rollers, idlers, these components consumed at rates that made the D9H expensive to own in aggressive work. Operators who pushed the machine to its limits in rock encountered downtimes that could stretch for days while undercarriage components were replaced. The 410 horsepower engine could generate forces that the drivetrain and undercarriage were perpetually trying to keep up with. Caterpillar's response was not to build a more powerful D9. It was to design an entirely new undercarriage, the elevated sprocket system of the D10, that could handle loads the conventional design never could. The D9H was the proof that the conventional design had reached its ceiling. Everything that came after it, the D10, the D11, the modern D9T, either adopted the elevated sprocket or was engineered as a clean break from the conventional architecture. The D9H is the machine that proved, definitively, that more horsepower and conventional undercarriage design were fundamentally incompatible above a certain threshold. That is a remarkable legacy for a single bulldozer model to carry. Number 1. The ACCO Super Bulldozer. If there is a single machine in the history of earth moving that most perfectly embodies the concept of being too strong for its own good, it is not a Caterpillar, it is not a Komatsu. It is a one-of-a-kind monster, built in northern Italy by a civil construction contractor named Umberto ACCO. and it is the largest bulldozer ever constructed by human hands. The ACCO Super Bulldozer was built in the early 1980s in Portogruaro, Italy, specifically for a land development project in Libya that required moving quantities of earth that no existing machine could handle. Umberto Eco built it from a combination of Caterpillar components, many standard, many custom adapted because nothing standard was large enough, plus specially fabricated structural elements. The specifications are almost beyond comprehension. The machine weighed 183 tons. It was 40 feet long, 23 feet wide, and stood 10 feet tall. Its blade measured 23 feet wide and 9 feet high. 2 Caterpillar 8-cylinder diesel engines, each producing 675 horsepower, combined for a total output of 1,350 horsepower. The rear ripper measured 10 feet long. Nothing like it had ever existed. Nothing like it has existed since. The ACCO Super Bulldozer was built alongside a companion machine, the ACCO Motor Grader, which we covered in a previous video, both destined for Libya. Both were completed. Both were ready for shipment. And then Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's involvement in international terrorism triggered United Nations trade embargoes. The machines could not be shipped. They sat in the ACCO factory in Portogruaro, gathering dust as the years passed. The Super Bulldozer was operated exactly once on a single job in southern Italy, before being returned to storage. The grader was never operated at all. Umberto Eco died. His son died. The company collapsed. By 2008, the ACCO facility had deteriorated into an abandoned dump yard, with the largest bulldozer ever built sitting amid piles of derelict machinery. In May 2012, the machine was moved under its own power to a local gardening company in Portogruaro, where it has been preserved. On October 13, 2024, the ACCO Super Bulldozer was started and run again for the first time in years, a moment that heavy equipment enthusiasts around the world watched with genuine emotion. The ACCO Super Bulldozer was too strong for the political world it was born into. Its 1,350 horsepower were rendered completely irrelevant by a United Nations resolution. A machine capable of reshaping the Libyan desert spent 40 years sitting in a factory in Italy, its potential entirely unrealized, its power completely useless. That is the most extreme version of being too strong for your own good. Power so vast, ambition so total, that the forces of geopolitics step in to make sure it never moves a single cubic yard. The ACCO Super Bulldozer is the greatest machine the world never got to watch work, and it sits at the top of this list because no other bulldozer in history has demonstrated quite so completely that raw power alone is never enough. So that's it for today. If you like this video, then please hit the like and subscribe button for more videos. Thanks for watching.